How to price freelance web development is today's topic, because this is something that we'll all have to come across at some point. And if you've been working in the web industry, if you've been working in a marketing company even, a lot of the time they'll ask you to simply figure out how long you should spend on a project. You might not even be in the sales meeting, but when you start doing freelancing, when you have to start selling websites yourself to clients, and you have to figure out the freelancing price that you're going to set for your clients, it's a little bit more complicated, and there are a few things that you have to consider when you're doing this. Now, before we get started, my name's Adrian. I do videos around design and development, so if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe, and let's just jump straight into it. So, in terms of freelancing, one of the things that people often do is not understand how to price a website. They simply might consider that the website will take them 10 hours, and they'll price 10 hours of work for that at maybe, say, $50 an hour. Now, unfortunately, this isn't always the best way. Simply because when you're creating a website, it's not only the time that you spend to create it, but there's a lot more to it as well. There is the initial engagement, and this is where you go to meet your client. You figure out the scope of the project, you do up a quote for them, you go back and forth and finally send them an invoice to begin the work. That all in itself is work per se, and that's something that should be billable. The next part is obviously developing the website, and this might be 10 hours for you or 5 or however long it is, but you can price this into your pricing as well when you do freelancing. But there are other aspects to this as well. There will be some back and forth. So after you create a website, and this is something that I experience all the time, the client will have changes. They'll want to review the work you do. They might suggest that they want to change the colors or the content, and you'll have to do this a few times, and these iterations can cost you a lot of time. It can cost you hours that you might not have estimated, and this aspect is actually quite hard to figure out. In the initial engagement, if you're really prepared and you get most of the content, you can avoid a lot of this. But again, this means that you have to spend some of that time in preparation beforehand. And this is time that you really need to be able to quote on when you're doing your estimates and your pricing. Then, of course, you have to consider how long it takes to put a website up online. When you're doing freelancing, you have to do it yourself. So you'll have to make sure there's a backup. You have to make sure that when you're putting up online, you do some testing as well. And all of these phases will add up to a cost too. And finally, you'll want to do some maintenance for the client after you've gone live. And some people bundle this into the initial cost, whereas some people prefer to do this separately. When you combine all of these factors, it's not that easy to create a simple price when you're doing freelancing. And because of this, I personally prefer to do value-based pricing. And this is a different type of pricing where you figure out what the budget is for a client and you sort of price around that. That way you can invest as much time as you need to into the project. In terms of value-based pricing, if you want to be able to achieve this, you really need to figure out your own approach to it. For me, I usually like to figure out what the client's budget is, and based on that budget, I can see more or less how much work I can complete for them, and give them estimates, give them a few ranges of work. The pricing for this is really simple because you simply are trying to define the budget and utilize that to the best of your ability, and you almost don't have to price that in a general sense. But if you're doing hourly based pricing, then you're putting yourself at great risk. So you're always going to give yourself some buffer room to be able to make sure that you can complete that properly. I know that in the past, I've done estimates where I thought a project might only take me 20 hours of work. But then going back and forth and doing the changes for the client took me another 20 to 30 hours, which I just didn't budget for. And if you go back to the client after the fact and say that, hey, I did all these extra changes for you, they'll expect that that was part of the initial price. And that's one of the things that sometimes is good to be able to put in your initial quote as well. that you'll only do revisions up to 1 to 2 hours. If you do this, if you hard write it into your contract, then you'll be able to make sure that if you go outside of those, you can charge accordingly. And I think that's a really important thing, especially when you're pricing and freelancing, because all that responsibility is really on your shoulders. I know that when I worked in marketing companies, it was a lot easier because you simply were working there. You didn't really have to worry about what the budget is for a project. You just needed to get it done. But when you're freelancing, you have to put in a lot of considerations. Of course, there's other considerations too. You have to figure out how much time you're going to do for your own super, for example, or how much time you have to make sure that is available for you in case you've got other projects that need to be done. Of course, there are other things too. When clients are asking you to do different types of work, the thing that I see creep up a lot is that they want this stuff done immediately. When I mean immediately, I mean that the urgency of the work that needs to be done is maybe this week or maybe next week, and you have to drop everything to be able to do this job for a client. When a client comes in with these kinds of demands, you have to price this accordingly as well. There should be a price where you're escalating your work. And this is a hard thing to do. Normally when I do this, I just add in 50% to the current quote. This is just an estimate, just so that there is a factor that shows that you're putting or raising the priority of the work. Because if you are dropping all your other customers to be able to complete a new customer's bit of work urgently, you can't just price that at the same level because you're sort of setting that expectation that you'll always drop everything for them at the same price. And whenever you're doing any work which is urgent, whether you're going to a printing company or whether you're going to a cake manufacturer, anything in general, you will always get an urgency fee that you have to pay if you want things done straight away. So this is something that you also have to factor in when you're doing freelancing. But these are some of the things that I consider when I'm doing freelancing myself. I've gone through a lot of troubles and a lot of realizations that mean that you really need to factor in lots of different things when you're doing freelancing. You have to factor in your pre-work. You have to factor in your quoting, your changes. You have to factor in the unknowns of what you might have to deal with clients. And you have to be really strict on your contract to make sure that you're covered in case things go outside of that scope of work. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit like, hit subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.